So that actually leads to my next question, and I suppose the answer is no. The next question I had was, will customs always pick up on these mistakes? And
no, they won't. The reality is, it's a lucky door prize, and so the checking of things today, even with border security and since 9/11, all that security and terrorism, where it's very tight these days. But even so, when you think about containers coming into Australia, you know, there's tens of thousands a year coming in. It's physically impossible, even with the big X-ray machines that they have.
Yeah.
They can't do every one. So the reality is it won't be. But I'm going to give the cautionary note here. Don't assume that your one won't be picked up. I mean, just like your one and my client. You know, that was a random.
Exactly, and often just doing it in the first, like eventually on a long enough timeline, the survival of any organism zero. So on a long enough timeline, the chances you won't get caught is zero as well. So eventually you will. So just for peace of mind, it's a good idea to just make sure you have your labelling and whatnot done as well. In terms of quarantine, just very briefly to talk about that. My understanding is this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that different countries around the world have their own local flora and fauna, different plants and animals and species that have their own ecological natural balance. And if you introduce something that's foreign into that balance, it can be disastrous and kill the whole food chain and cause a lot of devastation. Even crops and whatnot could be destroyed. Is that essentially the reason why we have quarantine, and one of the main reasons is that the purpose? And are they overreacting? Because when you come into airports, especially in Australia, you've got sniffer dogs, going all over you, and it's like there's no talk of weapons or drugs or anything, but God forbid you have one apple on you.
Exactly.
Because you're going to be in big trouble. So why is there such a strong emphasis here? Is it warranted? And have there been any examples where quarantine has failed and there have been ecological disasters in certain countries because of it?
Yeah, well, look, two things come to mind as you're mentioning that. One was, you might remember, it's probably about 10 years ago, there was an outbreak of foot and mouth disease in the United Kingdom.
Yep.
And in Australia...
Not mad cow, right?
Oh, sorry, you're right.
Cow.
It was mad cow.
Okay.
That's right, yeah. There has been outbreaks of foot and mouth in previous times, but it was mad cow disease. And so what they did in Australia said, well, okay, anything coming from the UK in a container, particularly the containers can have dirt on them, so it could have the infection from mad cow disease
in the dirt
hanging onto the container. And I was actually on a committee in the Sydney Port's Cargo Facilitation Committee. We used to have a monthly meeting, and I represented freight forwarders. And so what they did, they started inspecting every container that came in from the UK. And then they said, well, wait a minute, a container might go from UK to Paris, to Moscow, to Vladivostok,
at every little
and then
port.
maybe from Vladivostok to Kobe in Japan, and then down to Australia. But it could have the mad cow disease on it. So they then said, we're going to inspect the container that comes into the country, top, bottom, sides, everything. And they did. But they work with industry to say, look, we want to minimise the impact. We want to protect our country from that outbreak, which we hope doesn't happen.
Is a cane toad an example of failure quarantine?
Going back a long time. Yeah. And there was an outbreak of probably about 5, 6, 7 years ago of red ants from USA. Very aggressive ants.
Because they come to another environment that doesn't actually have it. They might not have a natural predator.
Exactly.
And they just thrive.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Another example, about 3 years ago, you might remember there was equine influenza.
Is that the bird flu?
No, it's a horse disease.
Yep.
And in Australia, there was a horse flying in. It didn't go through the correct procedures out at Eastern Creek, which is a quarantine facility for animals coming into Australia, and this animal had the equine influenza. And what happened is that sort of, it mixed with other horses, and all of a sudden we had this epidemic throughout Australia, and the racing industry was shut down.
Yep.
But not only that, there's lots of businesses that used horses. In fact, I had a lady importing horses from overseas, and she couldn't. And she had one from Spain, an Andalusian, and the other was a miniature from America. They were both in foal when they were coming here. They had to wait. When they finally came, they both had their foals. they actually had to bring in 4 horses instead of 2, so her costs went up dramatically.
Wow.
And that was all a result of this problem in Australia with equine influenza.
Wow. Okay. So do you find a lot of countries have the same sort of quarantine laws? And I've heard that it's much cheaper if you can abide by these laws in the foreign jurisdiction. So, for example, if you're in China and you have a container that has wood in it,
yes,
it's better to get it sprayed and get the certificate over there because you're paying for cheaper labour and whatnot. Whereas when it's here, A, you're going to get delayed, and B, you're going to pay more anyway. All right, fantastic. Let's talk very briefly about value-added taxes or goods and service taxes or sales taxes they have in America. Do they apply to all goods, internationally? When do they apply? When don't they apply? And how do they tend to be calculated?
It will depend on the situation and the jurisdiction that you're dealing with. So in Australia, we have a goods and services tax, GST, and that tax doesn't stick to business, basically the end consumer. So it's passed from business to business, and so a business can pay the tax domestically and claim it back. Yep. The same can be done international as an import into Australia. So the business can actually pay it and then claim it back. So it's not a cost of goods, but it's a cash flow implication.
You get a credit and then you get a debit, and then all.
Correct. So if you are an importer, you need to make sure that you have the system to claim back what you've paid out. Now, in other jurisdictions, like in the USA, I think the sales tax is a cost of sales, and so that has to be added onto the price of the product, and then obviously your profit margin on. So it depends on the jurisdiction. So yes, depending on where, and that may be particularly if you're a global trader and you're sourcing your goods from China, as you teach, then if you're smart and you say, well, I can not only bring him into Australia where I am, but I could find markets in other countries, like Simon that I mentioned before. He's looking for markets for products that he designs into other countries. So what you need to do is understand the different regimes as far as duties, as far as tax, where the tax is a cost or where the tax is just a cash flow implication. And that helps you in setting your price in that market, but also to make sure the process is in place so that if there is a claim back of a tax paid, that it's actually activated.
Gotcha. And how do you... can you defer GST in certain circumstances?
In Australia, you can.
Okay, and that's great for cash flow.
Yeah, I believe in the European Union there's a process similar. I had some correspondence with a person in the UK talking about our different regimes in relation to Incoterms. Yes, so in Australia, you have to lodge your business activity statements monthly. Yep. You have to be registered for GST and have an Australian business number, an ABN, and deal electronically, and then you can actually defer. And so what that actually means, it's actually very good for importers, is that they can not have to make that payment of that GST. So it actually saves their cash flow, because by the time you are going to pay it, you claim it back.
So whatever jurisdiction you're in, whether you're in UK, Australia, the US, please check with your customs agent, customs broker. Find out if there's ways you can avoid paying the tax up front, and that you can defer it, because a lot of cases you can if you just fulfill certain requirements.